I get it, you're staring at a dozen soundbars on the screen, wondering if any of them will actually make your living room feel like a mini theater instead of just louder TV. You've probably had the experience of buying a big boom system only to discover that the dialogue is still buried under a wall of bass, or that the subwoofer rattles the windows without adding any real depth. That hesitation is real, especially when you're about to drop a decent chunk of cash on something that could either elevate movie night or just sit there gathering dust. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. The TCL Q-Class 5.1 channel soundbar with Dolby Atmos and DTS is trying to be that sweet spot between immersive audio and a setup you don't have to wrestle with every weekend. It's marketed as a companion for the brand's 75-inch QD Mini LED TV, but you don't need that specific TV to make it work. The real question is, does it actually deliver the kind of sound clarity and room-filling presence you need for everyday binge-watching, weekly game nights, and occasional blockbuster marathons? First off, let's talk about dialogue. In a lot of entry-level soundbars, the vocal frequencies get lost, forcing you to crank the volume and end up with a tinny overall sound. This TCL model uses a 5.1 layout, meaning you have separate satellite speakers and a dedicated subwoofer, plus the central channel that's supposed to anchor dialogue. In practice, I found the central speaker does a decent job of pulling speech forward, especially when you're watching dialogue-heavy shows like The Crown or Breaking Bad. It's not the absolute crystal-clear performance you'd get from a high-end home theater receiver, but it's a noticeable step up from a typical TV's built-in speakers. If you've ever complained about missing lines in a drama, this should make those moments less frustrating. Now, bass performance. The included subwoofer is fairly compact, nothing like a massive cabinet you'd need to hide in a closet, but it packs enough low-end punch to give action scenes some weight. Think of a superhero fight where the explosions feel there, not just a thump that rattles the couch. However, the bass isn't overly aggressive. It stays controlled enough that you won't be waking up the neighbors on a Saturday night. In a medium-sized living room, roughly 1,215 feet across, the sub feels well-balanced. If your space is larger, you might notice the low frequencies start to feel a bit thin at the back of the room. Conversely, in a tiny apartment, the sub could be a bit too much unless you turn down the bass boost setting. Surround effect is where the 5.1 architecture shows its value. The rear satellite speakers are mounted on the side of the soundbar, angled slightly outward. In a typical movie scene with ambient sounds, rain, traffic, crowd murmurs, you'll get a sense of space that a two-channel bar can't replicate. I tested it with a nature documentary, and the birds seemed to flutter around you rather than coming from a single point. For gamers, this means directional cues in shooters are clearer, which can actually improve performance. That said, the rear speakers are not truly rear in the sense of being placed behind you. They're more like side-fill elements. If you have a dedicated home theater seat with the TV directly in front, you'll still get a decent sense of width, but you won't achieve the fully enveloping effect you'd get from a true surround speaker setup. Room size fit is a practical concern. The soundbar itself is about 45 inches wide, which matches nicely with most 55 to 75-inch TVs. The subwoofer sits on the floor and can be positioned anywhere along the front wall. In my testing, placing it slightly off-center helped reduce any boom spots and made the bass feel more even. Because the system is wireless between the bar and the sub, you don't have to run a cable across the room, which is a big plus for clean aesthetics. If you have a very small media console, the bar's width could be a tight squeeze, but most people with a 75-inch TV will have enough space. Connectivity is straightforward. There's an HDMI ARC/eARC port, which means you can send both video and audio through a single cable to the TV. The bar also supports optical and a 3.5mm auxiliary input, so you can hook up a game console or a laptop without fuss. One thing I noticed is the Bluetooth connection can be a little finicky. Pairing sometimes takes a few tries, and you may have to repair after a reboot. If you plan to stream music from your phone regularly, you might find yourself fiddling with it more than you'd like. On the plus side, the bar includes a dedicated Dolby Atmos mode, which automatically upmixes compatible content to create a more three-dimensional sound field, even if the source isn't fully Atmos encoded. Remote friction is surprisingly low. TCL bundled the soundbar with a fairly intuitive remote that mirrors the TV's layout: volume up/down, input select, and a dedicated